I do have some opening remarks that I would like to make. First of all, thank you all of those who were here yesterday. Thank you so much for coming back. And I do sort of want to pull everybody into our circle, those folks who weren't able to join us yesterday, to say a little bit about why we're here and what we're trying to accomplish. But we do have two special guests this morning, and I'd like to bring them forward so that they could say a few words first, and then we'll go back to the hard work ahead of us today, the hard and fun work ahead of us today. First, I'd like to ask Andrea Taylor to join us. Andrea Taylor is the director of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute and a longtime activist and supporter of civil rights. She began her career at the Ford Foundation, where, for those of you who know Eyes on the Prize, Andrea Taylor is responsible for funding Eyes on the Prize and for supporting so many others of our endeavors in this field. So I know Birmingham is thrilled to have her. She will say a few words, and then we will hear from our chief.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Can you all hear me? Good morning. Good morning, everybody. You can hear me. I won't worry about the mic. I want to just say welcome to all of you, to Margaret, and to Northeastern University, and to our distinguished speaker this morning, Robert Kelly, and to each of you from wherever you have come to the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, now part of the Birmingham Civil Rights National Monument. We know that you were here 4 years ago for a conference, some of you, but we weren't a national monument at that point. And we're really delighted that in January of this year, then President Barack Obama signed an executive order that made the Birmingham Civil Rights District, the historic places in Birmingham that were part of the civil rights movement. He named the entire collection of these sites, including the 16th Street Baptist Church, the Kelly Ingram Park, the Gaston Motel, which is over to my left, and the Bethel Church in Collegeville, part of a national monument to preserve and protect in perpetuity the rich civil rights history that occurred here that ultimately transformed this community and transformed the nation and the world with the passage of the Civil Rights Act and other things that occurred here. And so we are really pleased and proud of that designation, and we've been spending the subsequent weeks and months developing and understanding how you become a national monument. What does that mean? How do we need to reinterpret our history so that we can be appealing to the 300 million visitors that go to national parks and monuments every single year? And so we hope to capture our fair share of those visitors. We have generally about 150,000 people that come to this institution or that we reach annually through our programs, and we're hoping to, at the very minimum, double that in the next 2 to 3 years, and potentially we could see as many as 1 million visitors on an annual basis, which would really be very exciting. And it's interesting because we're living in a time, I think, where having an institution like this for interpretation, for preservation, for education, for people of all ages and from around the nation and around the world is really critical. You would be amazed, I am amazed, daily about the number of adults, to say nothing of young people, who come to the Institute and don't know anything about this history. Even people who live in Birmingham. I'm not from Birmingham, I'm from Boston and New York. I'm a Northeasterner, and when I talk to adults who are those who are in my generation, baby boomer, and they don't know about the 16th Street Baptist Church, and they don't know about Old Compton, they don't know this history. Some who live here who were sheltered from this story as young people. And so we have a lot of work to do, and we're excited that the monument designation gives us an opportunity to really reshape and to reach broader audience. The other thing that I would say to you about the Institute and our work from an educational point of view is that I don't know how many of you have had an opportunity to visit the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Anybody been there so far? Well, if you haven't, you need to put it on your bucket list. this. It's really something to be seen, and don't expect to spend an hour and a half. You need a couple of days at a minimum. And it's really been, it's just been a very, very exciting development to see the museum come into being, and it has created a lot more demand for regional history, because people see all that the National Museum has to offer, and then when they go back to their home communities, they're asking now questions about, well, what is the story in Birmingham, or Cleveland, or Chicago, or Philadelphia, wherever they are, and they want to know what is happening locally. So we've already seen between the creation of the National Museum and the designation of the National Monument, we've seen a significant increase just in the past 6 months. And so we're trying to staff up and gear up and really be in a position to receive the visitors that seem to be coming. We hope there will be many, many more. The other thing that I want to mention briefly, two things really. One is that, on a personal note, Margaret, Burnham's family, and my family have a shared history that goes back at least 75 years in Boston. And our mothers were friends back in the 40s when my mother was a student at Boston University. And I now currently am involved with BU. I'm a trustee, so I want to say a special welcome to our friends at Northeastern, our colleagues in academia, and it's very nice to welcome you not only in this role, but as a trustee of our BU, which is just down the street and around the corner. So it's really nice to have you here in that regard. And then finally, I would just end by saying that this is the 25th anniversary year for the Civil Rights Institute. It was in 1992 that the city fathers, mothers, and others determined that we needed to have a place where the difficult and tragic and often very controversial history of Birmingham and the surrounding community could be remembered and interpreted and be a lesson to people ongoing about the nonviolent social movement that did turn out to be a transformation and continues to be an example of how ordinary people can do extraordinary things. And I, as a person who's not from Birmingham, coming into this role, have often remarked that if they had not created the Civil Rights Institute in 1992, somebody would be trying to organize to create it today, because this is a reality for this community and for the country, and it deserves to be interpreted and reinterpreted and made visible to future generations, present and future generations. So we will have a big party here on November the 18th. The actual day of the opening was the 15th of November 1992. And we're planning a big celebration in our facility on the 18th of November, and we will be giving the Fred Shuttlesworth Human Rights Award to 3 recipients. Usually it's 1, but we took the liberty of our 25th anniversary. We will be honoring Mayor Richard Arrington, who was the first African-American mayor of Birmingham, who spearheaded the fundraising and development of the project. We'll also honor Harry Belafonte, who was very active here at the Gaston Hotel with Dr. King and Dick Gregory and Joe Baez and a number of others, so we're honoring him. And we're going to honor posthumously Viola Liuzzo for the role that she played in the movement. And her family will be here, her daughters, her 3 daughters are coming, and we're very excited. So if any of you are happy to be in Birmingham on November 18th, we'd love to have you join us. And we look forward to 25 more years and many, many more decades beyond to serve the community. And we know certainly from the violence that we see and discord in our communities that we still have a lot of work to do, and we hope to continue to be that relevant and meaningful organization. So welcome, enjoy yourselves, and I have some folders here that I would ask you to pick up. This is a hot-off-the-press brochure about the Birmingham Civil Rights National Monument and what it entails. So I invite you to pick up these brochures. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andrea Taylor. So our next next guest is Chief A.C. Roper. He is chief of the Birmingham Police Department and has over 30 years of law enforcement experience. Chief Roper began his career in Montgomery, where he was a member of that department in 1985. And then in 1988, he returned here home to Birmingham, where he was hired first by the Hoover Police Department, promoted through the ranks until his promotion to Assistant Chief of Police. And then since 2007, he has been chief here in Birmingham. Chief Roper holds a Bachelor of Science degree from Troy University and a Master's degree in Criminal Justice from the University of Alabama and a Master's of Strategic Studies from the U.S. Army War College. He has over 32 years experience in the Army Reserve, where he serves as a Major General. So the chief is here today at our invitation because many of the cases that we have investigated involve violence perpetrated by Birmingham police officers against its African American citizens in the 1950s and the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. As a matter of fact, in much of his work, Dr. Kelly, Professor Kelly, has documented the role of the Birmingham Police Department as the enforcers, oftentimes the violent enforcers of Jim Crow in the 20th century. And so in part, much of our work here today is to fully understand, illuminate and understand that history, and also to recognize that government responsibility is corporate. That is to say that it carries over from one generation to the next. One administration, not generation, but one administration to the next. In part, all of us who are now, many of us who are now in positions of authority, who are elected officials, African American elected officials, do have some duty and responsibility to acknowledge the wrongs that were committed in past generations under the name of law enforcement and public officialdom. We've invited the chief so that he, first of all, understand what the work is that we're doing, and also to hear what he has to say about his department today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for the introduction and thanks for not reading the whole bio.
We've been here all morning.
And my thoughts about bios is you can put anything on that you want to. Just put it on there, nobody checks. I'm going to sit down and get comfortable. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning. And I want to thank each of you for your interest and your efforts in the work that you're doing. And so thank you, because it needs to be done. And so I've been chief here for 10 years now, and I'm a son of the city. Grew up here, and I'll mention that in my remarks. So I think I was given 10 minutes.
Take your time.
Take my time. You know, I'm also a minister, so when you said take my time, I didn't really take my time. I didn't pass the offering plate, but once again, thank you so much for being here. So I have some remarks that I'd like to share with you. Birmingham is the most thoroughly segregated city in America. Was the verdict of Dr. Martin Luther King in 1960. He said this city is the most thoroughly segregated in the entire nation. Think about that for just a moment. And law enforcement is the most visible arm of city government. Not the fire department, not the library, not traffic and engineering. It's the police department. That's the most visible part of city government. And 40, 50, 60 years ago, the Birmingham Police Department was the arms and legs of the most segregated government, the most segregated city in America. Eugene Connor, better known as Bull Connor. Most people think he was the police chief, and he was not the police chief. He was the Commissioner of Public Safety, in charge of both the police and the fire department. He was a racist with connections to the Ku Klux Klan, and some of the police officers themselves were members of the KKK. They brutally enforced the racial status quo. And he locked up so many children during the Children's March that the police department ran out of room in the jail. And had to bus the kids to Fair Park and lock them up in cattle stalls. My dad and his friends marched during the height of the movement. And he kept that a secret until this year. We were talking on Father's Day, because he lives out of state, and for some reason he began to share some of the stories. And he mentioned one of the most violent days, not too far from here, right out here by the park, that he and his friends came down to march, and he described the car that he had. He was the only one that had a vehicle. They parked the car, they marched and did everything, and the police just, Bull Connor just turned everybody loose on him. Brutally. So my dad said he and his friends had to run to get away from downtown, and they left the car here. And he lived over in Kingston, and there's still people who live in the Kingston area of town that remember my family. And they left the car here, and I said, well, Pops, how come you left the car? He said, we couldn't risk it, because we knew if the police caught us, they would beat us. They would probably beat us within an inch of our lives. So they left the car, and he said my granddad, they got up around 2 o'clock the next morning, and they snuck downtown. Granddad was driving, and they found his car, and he said we took the back roads to get back to the house because we couldn't afford to get stopped by the police department. And I thought it was so ironic that his son is now the chief of this police department that chased him all over town. It's a story of redemption also. It shows that we have changed. I'm here to say we have a lot of work to do, and we're nowhere near where we need to be. So over a year ago, as a part of the Department of Justice National Initiative for Building Community Trust and Justice project, I met some of our surviving foot soldiers right here in this room. And I personally apologize to them. They had waited a long time. And I thank them on behalf of our agency, because they were brave when we were cowards. And they stood for right when we stood for wrong. And it's because of their efforts that I can wear this uniform with 4 stars on the collar. I remember a few years ago, Jesse Jackson was in town. We had a string of tornadoes that hit the city, and he came to visit, and he and I were talking, and he said something that I will remember the rest of my life. He said, Chief, me and Martin used to talk about you. And I said, what did you mean? He said, we used to talk about you. The police department would beat us all day long, run us all over town, throw us in jail every chance they get. And at night we would go to the A.G. Gaston Motel because there was no other motel in town that would accept African-American customers. And we would sit there at night and we would say, one day a black person would be in charge of this police department. And I'm not the first, I'm the third. But he said we knew that a change would come one day. And now I can stand here and talk to the change that we talked about 50 plus years ago. And I will never forget that story. So it really speaks to the responsibility that we have as African American leaders in the criminal justice system. Because it's not just the police. But we tend to focus on the police because of the uniform and us being the most visible part of government. But we've had issues through every aspect of this criminal justice system. The courts, corrections. We all have had a infamous history when it comes to how we've treated our African American citizens through the years. So whether it was by commission or omission, whether it was by our actions or our inactions as an agency, this police department that I have the honor of leading today was a dishonorable institution. And so I apologize to them, and I apologize to you. Because you're representing the families of people who were brutalized by our agency, and whether it was by our action or by our inaction. We tarnished the badge, and there's no excuse that justifies. So I still say we police under the shadow of the civil rights struggle. Our older generation especially still remember it. It's not uncommon to talk to a person who was brutalized by our agency. A person who did not get due process that was guaranteed by our Constitution. So, as a constant reminder in my office, I have a small file drawer that has the intelligence files of our police department and how we tracked the leaders of the civil rights struggle. And we documented every time they came to town. And this agency did everything it could to squash that movement. So we were the arms and legs of Jim Crow. And we enforced it with passion. So it's not an issue of me personally, because I'm not a racist, but the organization I lead, through the years it was. So we've done things wrong in the past, and we've done things wrong in modern history. And so there's been times where, as an agency, we had good intentions, but we caused the community harm. And so we're committed to being a model institution. I call it the relentless pursuit of excellence. And we work hard at it every day. So we were honored when the Department of Justice selected Birmingham, our police department, as one of 6 agencies across the nation to be a part of this national initiative of building community trust and justice project, because when you look at the videos, especially over the last few years, you can see we have challenges across the entire nation. And so when they looked out and said, what police departments are working at this? We were honored when they said the Birmingham Police Department is one of those. And so it's built on 3 foundations. One is procedural justice, which speaks to how we relate to our citizens every day. And our police department is one of the few in the entire nation that's had training in the entire spectrum of procedural justice, 1, 2, and 3. All about giving community voice, giving people voice, being neutral in our decision making, treating people with dignity and respect, and having trustworthy motives. So we've done all the training, and we work hard at that. We've gone through a policy review to make sure we have procedural justice in every policy where we can put it. But there's also a second component, which is implicit bias, which is those psychological processes that you're not even aware of that color how you interact with people. And so we've trained on that. We've worked to identify what those biases might be, because everyone has implicit bias. But the key is to keep it out of police work. And then third is racial reconciliation. And that's having frank conversations with members of our public that we recognize we haven't served with honor. And so we've had listening sessions all over the city. We've met with so many different groups to just listen about how we can be a better police department and where we can improve our service to them. And so there's a lot of work to be done, but we're headed in the right direction because history does have a way of coloring the present. And we have to acknowledge it, recognize it, and then work hard to make sure we're a better agency. We know we can't be successful without community support. And so when I became chief several administrations ago, we built our efforts on three different planks. And the first plank was engage the community, which is all about building relationships, building bridges, strengthening relationships, because no police department can be its best alone. So as a city and as a department, we have not shirked from our responsibility, and as painful as it might be, especially for our younger officers who sometimes don't understand why we have these kinds of conversations. We've worked hard to address those issues. So every police academy class, we started a new class 2 weeks ago. Every class, it's a promise I made, and I have not missed it yet. I help teach the ethics class. That way, every new officer understands the ethical requirements and the expectations of this agency and the chief. Because when you go out here and violate someone's rights, you're going to come see me. And so we've revised our mission statement and we based it on the Constitution. Because I want them to understand what the Constitution guarantees our citizens. Every new academy class spends a day here because we recruit nationally and we want every person who puts this badge on to understand the history of our city and the history of our agency. I don't want you to have an excuse that I didn't know. You need to know, because this agency is not like any other agency out there. This agency has a tarnished reputation. And now you're a part of it, and our job is to not forget the past, but work from the past to be a better agency. So I'll stop right there. I think I spent over 10 minutes.
No, we want you to be in the picture. Dr. Kelly. Where's our photographer? Is that our photographer? Yes. Did you get us?
Yes, ma'am. I got you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for being here.
here for the second day of the conference. Well, we had a very, I'm going to follow lead and have a seat here. We had a very, very rich discussion yesterday focused on essentially three cases. The Willie Edwards case from 1957, we had Ellen Brooks, the prosecutor of that case, who came to talk with us about the challenges of prosecuting. And then we heard about the Elmore Bowling case from Louth County from Joe Bowling, his daughter, and we heard from the nephew of Timothy Hood, who was killed in Bessemer in 1946 because he tried to move the colored board in the bus. So today we're going to continue hearing the stories. In a moment, I will turn over to Margaret Russell, who will introduce the family members who are here with us today and who are going to be interviewed while many of us are sitting here discussing these matters. Just to reiterate a little bit of what I said yesterday, this is the second of three sessions that we are having. That is to say, the Bowling Foundation and the Civil Rights and Restorative Justice Project at Northeastern University here in Alabama. Our first was at Tuskegee in June, now we're in Birmingham, and finally in March we will go to Selma. What we've done is we've divided the state, your state, into three parts, following the federal judicial districts, and we're looking at violence in the counties of each of those districts as we move across the state. Ultimately, what we hope to have is a full and comprehensive picture of homicidal racial violence from the years 1930 to 1970. We are using Alabama really as our beta test, and ultimately, of course, we will include all of the other, certainly the Deep South states and most of the states of the Confederacy. And all of this will be located at a publicly accessible library archive at Northeastern University, which will be accessible to scholars and to researchers and to family members and amateur historians alike, so that we can appreciate these stories, work with them, create curricula around them, and so that researchers can map the history of homicidal racial violence in the South during that particular period. My colleague in this work for the last 10 years has been Dr. Dean Melissa Nobles at MIT, and she will talk to us a little later on today and maybe say a little bit more about why we've chosen those years and how we go about the work. What we're doing in Alabama is, first of all, trying to bring our work back here so that people kind of can help us identify cases that perhaps we've missed and lead family members to us so that we can be as comprehensive and as thorough as we possibly can. This conference was made possible by the incredibly hard work of its planners, Dr. Rhonda Jones, who's an archivist who's on our staff. I think she's here somewhere, unless she's not. So we're here on account of Dr. Jones, Dr. Josephine Bowling McCall, Margaret Russell, and Vicki Rothbaum, all of whom talked on the phone every week for the last 4 or 5 months to make sure. Every Tuesday, 4 o'clock, to make sure that the breakfast was in place, and the room was in place, and the folks were in place, and the chief arrived, and so on and so forth. We thank you. To say that for those of you who've registered for the conference, and you can do so online, we have a registration site online. There are papers which are sort of embedded in the site, and there is also a bibliography. We've tried to include all of the work of certainly of the folks who will be presenting today, but that is relevant to this subject. But as well, more general work that you obviously may know, Karen Ingham and other major pieces about Birmingham and its struggles and its movements. And there's also a piece about our archive online, so I encourage you to register and to access those materials, and also to continue to be in touch with us as we work through this, as we move through this work. And now, Margaret Russell, could you please introduce our guests who are here as family members, and then I would like to bring Professor Kelly to.
Yes, I'm really honored to introduce Pamela Pierce, a relative who's with us today. And is Elizabeth Bloodberg here yet? Okay, so I think she is going to be here later today. And then, of course, yesterday, Henry Gaskins. Oh, Kathleen Poe is coming from Wilmington. Terrific.
So thank you so much.
Really great.
Ms. Pierce, we'll hear from Pamela Pierce, here from Addiston at lunch. Robin Kelly. Robin's an old friend, but he is also the Gary Nash Professor of American History at UCLA. He is the author, famously, of Hammer and Hoe, Alabama Communists During the Great Depression, Race Rebels, Culture, Politics, and the Black Working Class. Your Mama is Dysfunctional, Fighting the Culture Wars in Urban America, and also famously Thelonious Monk, The Life and Times of an American Original. Robin was in Boston 2 days ago because it's the 100th anniversary of Monk's birth, and Robin delivered the keynote address at the New England Conservatory, celebrating the life of Thelonious Monk. So this is a man of great range, shall we say. Robin also wrote Africa Speaks, America Answers, Modern Jazz, Revolutionary Time. He has spent most of his career exploring American and African American history with a particular emphasis on radical social movements and the political dynamics at work within African culture, including jazz, hip-hop, and the visual arts. Robin Kelly earned his doctorate in American history from UCLA, so he went back home. So Robin, let me just say a few words. Let me get off the formal biography and just say a few words about why we thought that Robin would be the ideal scholar to introduce our program today. Robin's work on Alabama in the 1990s, in preparation for his book, and much of it is included in his book on American communists in Alabama, is really transformative. First of all, Robin works from the bottom up, so lots of histories from the top down. Robin tells the story of the historical outsiders, the oppressed, the poor, the subalterns, those who otherwise would not have voice, the forgotten people. That's the gist and substance of Robin's work, and he does it really incredibly well in his work on Alabama. E.P. Thompson once said about history talked about history as the enormous condescension of posterity. And Robin's work is really a counter. All of his work is a counter, but particularly his work in Alabama. And in my own work, I wanted to just take a moment of personal privilege here, since I'm up here, to say that I particularly am indebted to Robin in thinking about Alabama, about Birmingham and the movement and resistance, the way in which resistance includes not just those who fought Bull Connor or who met over at the Gaston Hotel, but includes all of those who, in small and large ways, managed to be insubordinate. And Robin lifts that up for us and widens our imagination about what resistance what should be seen to be resistance, in particular in his piece Resisting Survival and the Black Court in Birmingham, 1920 to 1970, which an essay he wrote in the 1990s, and in his book, in his article, We Are Not What We Seem, Rethinking Black Working Class Opposition in the Jim Crow South. I like his books, I like his work on Monk, but those pieces are absolute gems, and I recommend them. They're old, and maybe Robin would say, you know, I've moved on. But those are classics. Those two essays are absolutely classics, and they will allow you to think about history in ways you perhaps have not done so before. So it's with great pleasure that I ask Robin to come and share some words.
So, you know what, you don't mind if I use the podium, is that okay?
Please do.
Okay, because that's actually better for me to stand. Not because I'm afraid, but because, you know, even though I don't carry that tradition, my grandfather was a minister. He was actually the founding pastor of St. John's Missionary Baptist Church in Boston.
Is the mic on?
Is the mic live?
Yeah, it should be live now.
I think we need.
Okay. So anyway, I feel like it's on. Yeah, it's on. Here we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's on here.
Okay.
Be louder.
Okay, so that was like the kind of you can hear me now?
Yeah.
No?
We can hear you.
Louder.
Okay, so let me, what I want to do, because time is short, is try to talk.
Take your time.
Okay, I don't want to take up too much time. I actually want to have some time for a discussion, because usually it's the back and forth that matters the most. It's an honor to be here, obviously, and I really thank Margaret for this invitation. As soon as she asked me, I was like, no matter what I'm doing, I'm going to be here. And for many reasons. One, I haven't been back to Birmingham since I wrote the book. The book came out in 1990. The 20th anniversary issue just came out a couple years ago. And it's weird. It's totally strange walking down the street. Because when I was here doing research at the Birmingham Public Library, I had $600 to live on for 4 months. And I did it. I stayed at the Plantation Motor Lodge in Enfield and walked. But when I was there, the only place to eat was at the courthouse. And the food was terrible. And people would do things like put coleslaw on hot dogs. And I was like, what's that about? Anyway, so now you got restaurants, you got all kinds of stuff happening. Now there's something really gratifying, if not tragic, about the fact that, you know, Margaret and her team are pursuing some of the very same cases that were first taken up by her parents. Okay, this is very important. Lewis and Dorothy Burnham and others in the Southern Negro Youth Congress over 60 years ago. And these are cases of police killings that I learned about researching the Communist Party and the Southern Negro Youth Congress. You know, cases that are in the book. O'Day Henderson, John Jackson, both in Fairfield, Timothy Hood, William Daniel. But see, this is not simply serendipity. We only know about these cases because people fought back. That's why we know about them. We know about them because there was a movement ready to organize when people fought back. So you consider the sequence of events. All these cases, these particular cases I mentioned, began with acts of resistance. You know, Henderson and Jackson were arrested for what? For arguing with white men. For speaking back. Hood for physically moving the segregation placard and then arguing with a white bus driver. So these people were not killed simply for having black skin. I mean, I want to really emphasize this because I always end up pushing back against certain kind of narrative. It wasn't because they had black skin. They were not senseless killings in that sense. They were killed because they challenged the codes of white supremacy. Just having black skin alone is not enough. Black skin is what marks them as being inferior, as being exploitable, as being a source of capital and profit, right? But it's because they challenged the codes of white supremacy. And they did this in the context of black insurgency. Right? That's the moment, in the 1940s. During World War II, amidst a growing militancy across the country, an expectation on the part of black people that fighting for democracy abroad means that you should be a citizen at home. That was the assumption, that if you're going to die for citizenship, you might as well die at home fighting for that. And this terrified the white power structure. And that's just the beginning. In each case, people, family, witnesses, whomever, came to the Southern Negro Youth Congress offices to report what had happened that was already a courageous act. And then the SNYC, in turn, like the Burnhams, brought these incidents to the world's attention, organized protests, demanding a full and impartial investigation of the police departments, worked with the NAACP to try to bring charges against the officers, and as early as 1941, they helped form the Jefferson County Committee Against Police Brutality, with groups like the League of Young Southerners and the Communist Party. And in fact, it was this collective mobilization that really sparked by individual acts of resistance, which ended up resulting in their premature deaths, that really explains how these cases ended up in William L. Patterson's We Charge Genocide in the first place. In other words, they would have been lost to history. They would have just totally disappeared. But people made it visible in fighting back. And that's how Patterson, who at the time headed the Civil Rights Congress, was able to document these and make them visible. And in fact, if you think about what the Civil Rights Congress did, it's very much like CRRJ. Its raison d'etre was to investigate these cases, publicize them to the world, try to bring justice to the victims in their communities, and ultimately put an end to racist, state-sanctioned, and vigilante violence forever. So this morning, what I want to do is sort of take up Margaret's challenge yesterday afternoon to talk about the role of movements, how they figure in the stories that you're about to collect, how they shape the dynamics and even the outcomes of each of these cases, especially in Alabama. And there's something to be said about, in fact, let me back up. Something that Margaret said yesterday is very profound, and it really struck me. And by the way, this is why I came to the conference yesterday without a talk and said, well, let me just listen to what people have to say and sort of respond. But something she said yesterday was very profound. She said, part of what we're losing are the histories of resistance. Now, of course, we're inside of a museum. We're inside of an institute that is devoted to histories of resistance. So you ask, well, how can you say that? We're one of the major museums devoted to the civil rights movement. Well, it's precisely because the narratives and images of the movement we've inherited have actually so dominated our thinking that they've kind of erased and obscured some of that history. And that's the history I think you're trying to recover. So we're fed the same images. Hundreds of black men and women, boys and girls facing down trained attack dogs, high-powered fire hoses, tear gas, billy clubs, all at the hands of Eugene Connor's finest. Right across the street, we got Kelly Ingram Park. We have scenes of black people kneeling in prayer, dragged and beaten by police, teenagers sliding across the pavement from the force of fire hoses. We know that. We see children packed in paddy wagons on their way to jail. These are the iconic images of the civil rights movement. And they were powerfully displayed here at the Institute. And the Institute, I think, does an excellent job of really trying to get behind those images. And I went and got to see the exhibition yesterday for the first time. But then there's a kind of national narrative that tries to explain what they're fighting for. And what is it? Well, at the top of the list, and I'm not saying this is the truth, this is the narrative, but at the top of the list, they're fighting to integrate public accommodations. That's the story. They're fighting to integrate public schools. That's the story. They're fighting for the right to vote. But what's not always at the top of the list, which we know is at the top of the list, rarely mentioned, is that they're fighting against state-sanctioned violence. Or for that matter, the economic violence of wage inequality, of occupational ceilings, of the kind of semi-slave conditions that black working people have to face. And the movements at the forefront of these struggles are often kept out of these kinds of monuments and museums and mainstream history books. And I don't blame the museums for that, but this has to do with what's the dominant narrative. So, I don't always see the history of the Southern Negro Youth Congress in our general histories of the movement. And this is an organization that lasted longer than SNCC. Lasted longer than SNCC. It had, in terms of its membership and its impact, it was enormous. I don't always see the League of Young Southerners. I don't see the Civil Rights Congress, for example, included in these. I mean, Recharge Genocide was recently discovered. It's like on the internet now. This is the text I was always saying. I don't see the National Negro Congress in those. I don't see the Sharecroppers Union. The Sharecroppers Union here in Alabama, which was one of the most militant organizations, had at one point about 12,000 members. But we don't know that history. I don't blame anyone for that. But part of what we have to do to dig, to understand what does it mean to fight state-sanctioned state violence, is to come back and recognize the role these movements play. So fortunately, we actually have tons of oral histories and oral history projects over the years that have documented the experiences that I'm talking about, because I learned from those projects. And these are struggles that are not part of the iconic narrative of the Civil Rights Movement. So for example, the Southern Oral History Project at UNC, Chapel Hill, African American Life in the Jim Crow South at Duke University. Right here, one of the best oral history projects to date is the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute Oral History Project, which was headed by none other than Professor Horace Huntley, who's over there. In fact, Horace Huntley's book, Foot Soldiers for Democracy, is one of these really important texts. I can't even stress how important it is. And those stories really kind of, reorganize our thinking, reorient our thinking about the Civil Rights Movement. And I learned from Andrea that there will be an exhibit building on that text and those interviews soon. And then there's others, the Working Lives Oral History Project at University of Alabama. But one question that we might ask is, given your project, what would you do differently? What are the unanswered questions? What does it mean to conduct oral histories with racial violence as a central topic? With that kind of trauma as a central topic? What does that mean? And more importantly for me, what do we need to know about the social movements, about the collective resistance in these narratives? And here I want to suggest that if you approach these oral histories thinking less about people as victims, and more about racial violence as struggles for power, it might reorient interviews in some productive ways. And I give myself in trouble for this all the time. But you know what? I got a plane to catch at 5 o'clock, so if you're mad at me, if you want to. But let me just repeat that. To think about people as not as victims, but as these stories of struggles about racial violence and struggles for power. Because it will reorient the interviews in productive ways. Every killing of every black man and black woman and every child is a struggle for power. Because black people are perceived as a threat to white power and privilege. They're not just there as like an eyesore. It's about power. Right? This plays out in economics. It plays out in sexuality. And sexuality, we know, is a form of property. White women are a form of property, and so you touch white women, it's about property ownership. Right? We know that it's about masculinity, that white masculinity has been fragile in Jim Crow, and that fragility leads to violence. We know it's about the fear of extending political rights. So orientation is everything. Orientation determines the kinds of questions you ask. And orientation can create a kind of unconscious hierarchy of value when it comes to memories that we think are important. So sometimes we don't always listen to our informants. We know what the memories we're looking for, and when we find it, we're like, oh, that's it, we follow up. But the memories that actually may disrupt what we think are the ones we have to pay attention to. We need to be conscious of how the present weighs on our interpretation and orientation toward the subject. When we think about it, Chief Gober said something very profound. He says, that history can shape our present. But I would also add to that our present shapes how we understand history. So consider the fact that you're collecting stories and investigating cases at this moment when state-sanctioned racial violence is pervasive, seemingly unstoppable, and is explained by a kind of language of anti-blackness. And as a result, I know with my students, they have a lot of trouble understanding anything except for anti-blackness as the explanation for violence. So they have trouble understanding, for example, the class dimensions of state and vigilante violence. And they end up reducing history to a kind of unchanging, immutable anti-blackness that's always been with us. And it means that they can only see communities affected by this wave of homicides as traumatized victims, not as agents of history, not as resources, not as sort of resources for resistance. And so yesterday I was really pleased and moved when Josephine McCall gave us this brilliant lesson in how class, race, and gender actually work dynamically. When she explained that one of her father's mentors was the son of a woman who had been evicted from her rented home when Mr. Bowling leased the land she was living on. I was like, okay, well there's a lot going on there. This is not simply the story of like, we just hate this black man because he's rich. There's some dynamics. Because, to think about that story, and to walk here this morning, on my way to the museum, and to pass by a shelter where outside are black and white women all homeless. On my way here, right? You can't forget that and act as if there's a simple explanation. So I'm saying, these are the kinds of questions that haunt me. So I came to my own project from a different place. In time, as Margaret mentioned, I really hammered the whole, I was in search of revolutionaries and how they came to be, how they organized and sustained themselves, how they forced white supremacy to yield in some cases, how they defended their communities and simultaneously drew greater repression because they threatened the powers that be, and how they sometimes actually held state violence at bay because they were so organized. So it was the struggles in South Africa that led me to Alabama, by the way. That's another story we can talk about. So, for example, all of us are familiar with the Scottsboro case. I don't have to talk about that. And most likely we're familiar with the organization, the International Aid Defense that organized around it. But what's not always clear is how this organization turned what would have been routine selfish tragedy, because these kinds of killings take place, into an extraordinary world historical event. So first, the International Aid Defense and the Communist Party took the issue of lynching in Alabama before Scottsboro. They had already organized. In fact, they had taken up a case of a lynching in Emma, Alabama, multiple lynching in Emma, Alabama, a year before. And then in 1930, this is a year before Scottsboro, organized a national anti-lynching convention in Chattanooga and another one in St. Louis. So they'd already been doing the work. They were organized. Scottsboro didn't make them into an anti-lynching organization. They had become that. Secondly, they didn't believe justice could be won in the Jim Crow courts. So they adopted a strategy and an analysis that was completely unique. So they did three things. One, they put forward this idea, this critique of injustice, that persuaded people that the defendants were not only innocent, it's not just about like they're innocent, they should be let go, but that they were victims of a system of racism. They were victims of systemic racist and class oppression. But they were the victims. Secondly, they said, we're going to fight in the court of opinion. Yes, we're going to have a trial. Yes, we're going to have lawyers. But we're going to fight in the court of public opinion. And that meant building a social movement with a national and international reach. So imagine what it means that these 9 young men, some were really children, suddenly would be the subject of protest 2 weeks after they're arrested in Cleveland with 13,000 people, in New York City with 20,000 people, with protests in Paris and Moscow, in South Africa, in Tokyo, right? No one knew who they were, but it's the ILD that made that possible, to say, you know what, we're going to make sure that the world notices. Third, and this is the most important for me, is that they changed the narrative. The left press, the ILD, the communist press circulated stories and images that presented an alternative reality, that humanized the defendants and generated sympathy and indignation. So think about what those representations countered. They countered the stereotypes, the racist and gender stereotypes that painted all black men as violent, all black men as rapists, and all white women as pure virtuous victims. So what they set out to do was extraordinary. They set out to revert, and this is important because this is what we're dealing with today. They set out to reverse the poles of criminalization, to turn young black men into victims and the state into the criminal. Malcolm X said that. This is before Malcolm X. Malcolm X is about 10 years old, right? 9 that old, when they did this. So the narrative deeply affected the organizers on the ground, not to mention the political culture in Birmingham. So I'll give you a little story. In 1934, the International Labor Defense in Birmingham had about 3,000 members. It was the largest black civil rights organization in Birmingham, in the city, much larger than the NAACP. But in some cases, it began not just defending black people in the courts and from the police, but defending them with guns. So to cite one example, in Selma, the ILD defended this employee named Ed Johnson, and he was charged with raping a white woman, falsely charged. The court had to dismiss the charges when the victim admitted in court that the police forced her to invent the story. Now, why did she do that? How did she do it? She said, look, she said to the jury, I'm not going to be like Victoria Price, but like Ruby Bates. And if you know the story of Scottsburg, Ruby Bates was the one who said, you know what, it never happened. And it was the Communist Party and the ILD that defended her, protected her, and took her on tour to say, you know what, look what happens when you do the right thing. You could be a hero. Without that organization, a white woman who did that would not be a hero. She would be considered low class, she would be ignored, and they still lynch him, and she'd be considered like sexually questionable. But instead, so this woman told the truth because she had a model to follow. So imagine what that meant. In any case, as soon as Johnson was released, the sheriff tried to hand him over to a lynch mob, but then the International Labor Defense foiled the plan because they organized a defense squad, an armed defense squad of ex-servicemen who defended him, who protected him so that the lynch mob couldn't get him. I mean, these are the stories that don't always get into the history books because he was not killed. So imagine if you have stories of people who were saved as part of the narrative, people who lived, who were defended. This raises a really big question that, I'm just leaving on the table. I'm not going to take it up. Y'all take it up. And that is the role of armed self-defense in saving black people. My friend and former student, Akinyele Umoja, wrote a wonderful book called We Will Shoot Back, which is about Mississippi and armed self-defense. And one of the things that he shows is that in the counties where you had armed self-defense groups, you had less violence. Fewer people died. In places where you didn't have armed self-defense, more people died. So that's part of the narrative as well. How do people defend themselves? So these questions will have an impact on the way we think about remedies. And I just have a couple more things to say, and I want to turn over to the conversation. So I understand that prosecutors and officers of court are constrained by the law. And I also understand that these very constraints presumes that that government or the state, is in a kind of equilibrium. In other words, if there's harm that violates the law or violates the Constitution, there needs to be consequences, and with consequences comes some kind of compensation or repair in order to get equilibrium back. But and this is my question, Does restoring equilibrium change relations of power? Or is it just about keeping power at bay? All the radicals I write about in my book were not interested in equilibrium. They wanted to take power. And yes, they tried to force local government and police in the state to abide by the law, but for them, they saw no problem breaking the law. You know, think about what it means. I mean, long before Dr. King wrote a letter from Birmingham jail, you had ordinary people who engaged in collective action that would be considered breaking the law. For example, if someone's electricity got turned off, they would show up with jumper cables and run a line from the city electricity power space into the house. You know, if someone's water got turned off, they would come and turn the water back on illegally if they couldn't pay their bills. You had men working on trains who early in the morning would kick big pieces of coke and coal off the train so that people have fuel. You know, they're basically engaged in acts of theft. But for them, this was justice. All these were justice, collective acts of justice. So finally, one last point. I'm struck by how in our narratives of Birmingham, 1963 is a kind of turning point. It's a culmination of decades of racial violence, which then enters a kind of period of calm and accomplishment in Black empowerment. And which is why I love the fact that the narrative that you set out in your project goes to 1970. Because based on my research, it's actually the other way around. The opposite occurred. State violence intensified because African American youth and ordinary working people were just, in fact, emboldened after 1963. They were considered impudent. They were militant. And that militancy was met with backlash, not complacency. So throughout the mid-60s, complaints of white residents of Black impudence and discourteousness flooded the city council, flooded the mayor's office. Police repression actually increased after 63. So between 63 and the early 70s, Black male youth from poor communities accounted for the majority of incidents of police homicides and beatings. And in the 14 months between January 1966 and March 67, 10 Black men, most of whom were teenagers or young adults, were killed by Birmingham police. And Fred Shuttlesworth was actually in high gear. He attempted to file suit against the city in order to obtain police department and coroner's records so they can investigate past cases of police homicide. So what I'm suggesting is that that period after 63, there's a lot going on, and there's a lot to investigate there. But because the TV cameras disappear, it doesn't seem to be as important. And I just want to make that case. So in closing, resistance, always embodies a kind of unique combination of courage, of fear, and of hope. And no matter how many photographs or hours of videotape we watch of the events of Birmingham in '63, or any place where Black people are struggling for freedom, the images never can really capture the complexity of the spirit of resistance, which is why these oral histories are so important. Sometimes only words or expressions or feelings, rather than descriptions of events, can capture the intangible elements of the Black freedom movement. And remember that what you're about to collect will speak to the most emotionally wrenching experiences in people's lives. And those experiences may actually not be encapsulated in the killings themselves, but in the funeral. In all the sleepless nights, thinking about loss. In living the memories, not of the person's death, but how they lived. How they lived, what kind of person was. I think about, yesterday, Timothy Hood's nephew talked so much about Timothy Hood as a man, not as a corpse. And these are the things that in doing these interviews, I really pay attention to. It's life, not death. All these matter. And this is why I so appreciate the theme of resurrecting our stories, because it implies two things. One, that these stories had to be alive in people's collective consciousness, otherwise you can't bury them. And two, they're buried beneath these other narratives, and by raising them up for dead, we not only revise our understanding of history, but open up new pathways to imagine a different future. Thank you. So hopefully you have some time, because I love the questions, comments, thoughts, you know.
I'm Pam King. I teach history and public history at UAB.
Okay.
And last spring, I taught a history on a class on public history. And their entire assignment was your book,
Oh, really?
Hammer and Hoe. And the class, I have an interesting question.
Okay.
So, their sole book was Hammer and Hoe, and their project was to create each of them a project where an exhibit where they're exhibiting the communism history of communism in Birmingham, right? So I told them at the beginning, I told them 20%, I told them 30%, I told them every few minutes that what you said in the book, what I believe I got it right, was that black women were the backbone of that movement.
Yes.
I said it over and over. I'm not saying that he's saying it. And I told them over and over, do not turn in an exhibit where you don't present black women as key figures. No exhibit came back to me on the final day, Dr. Jameson was there, that had any black women in it. And so your emphasis on sexuality, gender, those kinds of things, I think is so important, as well as your comment about white women being property. I just wonder if you could comment about that. Why is it so hard to get anybody to give women, black women in this case, credit?
Right. Well, you know, it sadly doesn't surprise me, in part because when we think about the exhibition of history, that is how to put history, how to make it visual, how to make it present, how to make it exciting, people go for the same narratives, that is acts of violence. Despite the fact that black women were right there, you know, I mean, there's so many examples of that. I mean, even in the rural areas where whenever anything happened, it was black women who often were the first ones to get guns and go chase somebody, right? But acts of violence, acts of heroism, and the fact that the organization itself, despite the fact that black women were sort of central in organizing, the leadership were mostly men. And they're the ones that left the memoirs, and they're the ones that left, you know, much. So I worked really hard to figure out who the Stella Miller was, and Eula Gray, and the fact that the Southern Union Congress leadership were women, like, you know, like Dorothy Burnham, and, you know, and so in some ways, it's hard because we have to reorient ourselves to think about what's really important and valuable. I remember talking to Esther Hooper Jackson about how that the only way they could get some of the workers involved in SNYC was to talk to the wives. And they talked to the wives first, and once they got them on board, then they could actually go to the male steel workers and iron ore workers and stuff like that. But that's not drama. So we have a lot of work to do. And one last thing I have to say, it plays itself out in current movements where Black Lives Matter is an organization organized by and led by women, but they don't always get the credit. Fees Must Fall, Rose Must Fall in South Africa. Women were at the forefront, but men sort of took over in terms of getting credit for that. And I'm not saying that I'm not critiquing men, because there are lots of men who actually hold up these relationships. But that's not the way we understand history, because it disrupts our thinking. What impact does this have on the oral histories? I think it's enormous, because even asking the question about who cleans up after a lynching, who does that work? That's another dimension of this experience. And the fact that women as victims of state violence and vigilante violence not always held up. But luckily, I mean, in the work that Margaret and you all are doing, we actually have women in there as both victims and as people who memorialize this.
I'm a lawyer, and most of what I do now is sue police and get my ass kicked. But it raises a couple of questions in mind. One thing is recognizing the importance of the rule of law.
Right.
On the other hand, the question that doesn't get often asked is whose rule and whose law, which you touched on. And I think it's really significant, and I'd like to hear some more about how you balance those two things.
Right. See, luckily, since I'm not a lawyer, I don't have to balance those two things. So I can talk all day long, just like yesterday. I'm like, yeah, well, what about reparations? I mean, I can talk about it, but I also understand how difficult it is to try to win individual cases, because in some cases, there are class action cases and there's individual cases, and sometimes you are constrained by the law. I think that part of the work that you're doing here, and part of the work that 50 years ago, the Civil Rights Congress, more than 50 years ago, 60 years ago, Civil Rights Congress did, was to try to begin at the question of law and constitutionality and then make a leap to how do you change laws to protect the citizens, and how you recognize that what's happening is not simply a matter of the violation of law on the part of institutions like the police, but that they're actually protected by the law, that their actions are protected by law. And so that makes the law just in many cases. And so I think that, I don't know if this is a balance, but I do think that we can't move towards repair as if repair is about paying for past incidents without the reorganization of the whole legal edifice. And the reorganization of the legal edifice may also mean things like, I mean, for me, completely reimagining what we mean by police. Thinking about committees of public safety, and public safety as the main, public safety is the main objective of police. Then that widens the gap to all kinds of things. Economic, security, public safety in terms of the preservation of people's lives living in public housing projects where they're dying of all kinds of things. Public safety means to serve and protect as opposed to surveil and subjugate. And that's a very different way of thinking about public safety. And I'm not saying you could legislate that. It means a whole transformation of mindset. But it also means that, and this I'm going to get controversial a little bit here, that the work of determining what is ethical within a police force cannot be left to the police force. As much as I really appreciate all the work, that's a collective conversation for the community to decide. And that if you think of the police as a working force as opposed to standing above the community, it just changes the dynamics dramatically. So that's just some ways to think about it. I know there's a lot more to it.
So, two things. Number one, I wanted to acknowledge the presence of Catherine Poe, who is the niece of O.D. Henderson. And Robin mentioned O.D. Henderson as one of the cases that we've been working on. Robin talked about in his book, so thank you very much for coming. So Robin, I just wanted to push back on one point that you made about victims. Because this notion that the term victims implies a kind of lack of agency and weakness really comes initially out of feminist thought that women who are in fact victimized shouldn't be seen as powerless. And while there's truth to that, there's also the reality that people like Malcolm X was a victim. Did he not have agency? Did he not have power? Did he not change history? He did all those things. But at the end of the day, and you can talk about it sort of in clinical legal terms if you want to confine it to that. So when we use the term victims, we're really talking about people whose lives were cut short by lawlessness in a very kind of legal, just a straight legalistic way, which is not to take anything from what you said about their resistance and the ways in which their resistance may have ultimately led to their demise. So that's the one point. And the other thing I did also want to say is that while it is definitely true, and I thank you for this point, that you lose the resistance if you don't realize that people were pushing back. People like Tim Hood and Elmore Bowling were actually pushing back. They were acting, they were alive, they were, more than just black skin. It is also true that black skin could get you killed. And we have lots of examples of cases. The one that Ellen Brooks talked about yesterday, Willie Edwards, who was mistaken for somebody else who, said something nasty to a white woman. Okay, that's not about resistance. That was just black skin. So both of those things really have to be. They can live together, and they do live together. And we just have to acknowledge that the resistance can't be lost, but the accident of black skin can get you killed.
Right. Well, let me just say, and the first thing I totally agree, and that is that I'm also dealing with a whole bunch of students all over the country who have a particular definition of victim. And this is the Afro-pessimist position, which is that we actually have no history precisely because we're victims. That history has actually, we can never have agency precisely because of the middle passage narrative. And that's what I'm arguing against. I totally agree with you that there's no question that they were victims, victimized. It's when you stop at victim that all this other stuff just disappears. On the second point, I actually think that in the case of those black people who are mistaken identity, it's still something initiated it, where because of what's the fungibility of black skin, that is that any one of us can be mistaken for another one of us. But still, you still pointed to this fact that there was some attempt at justification that is generated from fear. And that fear is still white fear. And it was white, in other words, when I say that it's not just black skin alone, I'm saying two things. One, that all black people are vulnerable to certain kind of violence, though some more than others. And that's also the lesson in Hammer Hill, that there were some black people who actually were tied up to Tennessee Coal and Iron Company, who actually were participating in the maintenance of oppression of other black people. But ultimately, we all are interchangeable in the sense that we could all be mistaken for someone else. But there's something about what's the source of the fear of black skin, that it just is not the result of the fact that we're born black, it's a result of this history. And a history so it's not blackness alone, but the meaning that people make of blackness. And the meaning that people make of blackness is that blackness is not just abject, blackness is dangerous. And it's dangerous because white supremacy is fragile. It has always been fragile. It's always teetering on collapse. Racism is not that strong. You think of it as this overwhelming, overpowering thing, but it has to shore itself up constantly. And our very presence is danger. So if you just look at someone playing, or play your music loud, you can be killed for that. And it's it's not because you played your music loud and looked at someone funny, it's because you represent the challenge to power. And any act of insubordination is a threat to that power. So my whole point is that it's exactly the fragility of white supremacy that makes people trigger happy and very quick to kill. And when people say that white folks, don't know anything about, they have no particular sort of relationship to racial violence, I disagree with that, because they actually end up being complicit both in the reproduction of racial violence, but in some ways a certain kind of victim. Because when you start to break that mold and step out against system of white supremacy, you sometimes pay a price. Not the same price that we do, but you sometimes pay a price. And so part of Hammer and Hoe is strewn with all these dead bodies of white people who said, you know what, I can't abide by this anymore. And they end up being not only just beaten, but killed in some cases. That doesn't make them, special. It just means that the system is one that makes all of it, ties all of us together in some unfortunate ways. So I take the criticism and I agree with it. I just want to always remind us that when we try to get to the explanation of why things happen, let's not stop at they just kill because they're black. And let's not also stop at a legalistic explanation for it. Because when you get past the legalistic explanation to the structural explanation, when you get past implicit bias to the entire structure that legalized the Klan, that legalized police state violence, that made all these things legal and legitimate, then we recognize that all kinds of hands are bloody. The state's hands are bloody from the federal government on down to local government. They're all bloody and they're all complicit. So therefore, reparations now.
Reparations now. So, thank you so much. Thank you, Rob. Before we move on to our next panel, I would like to bring forth Robin's host. When Robin was in Birmingham working on his book many years ago, the food might have been bad, and the hotel he stayed in might have been bad, but he had a good friend here in Birmingham who was his real host, and he slept on his couch for many nights, from what I understand. And that would be Scott Davis. Scott is the executive director of the Great Birmingham. Douglas. I'm sorry. It's right down here. Let me pull this closer. Scott Douglas, who's also an old friend of mine. I'm sorry. Scott is the native of Nashville, executive director of the Great Birmingham Ministries. He's been in Alabama and Birmingham here since 1976. Worked with, under the leadership of Fred Shuttlesworth and wonderful Ann Braden. And he's a great fighter for justice and freedom and equality and restructuring and reparations. Scott, welcome.
I'll be very, very brief. Just know the room in which Robin stayed was my son's room. It had another person stay there too. It was Pete Seeger.
Wow. He never told me that.
And, he came here because he was doing a concert we had against apartheid. And we united Alabama coal workers and coal miners, SCLC, in a large parade downtown against the South African coal. But anyway, I just want to say this, structurally, we still exist in Alabama under the Alabama Constitution of 1901, where the president of the convention, John what we want to do is establish white supremacy by law. After the 15th and 14th and 15th Amendments, they had to get around some things to keep slavery still alive under another name. And that was the Alabama Constitution of 1901. And they even said this: we're tired of having to steal black votes. And the only way to stop decent white men from stealing black votes is to disenfranchise the Negro.
That's right.
So it was a moral act they did. in defense of the civility of white males to disenfranchise the black voters. And finally, they did it by, what do you say? They wanted public confidence in the outcome on this vote for the new Constitution, 1901. You would have to believe that in the black belt, Dallas County, that more black men that lived there voted, number one. And they voted almost unanimously to never vote again. It was widespread knowledge that this Constitution would remove their disenfranchisement, would remove their right to vote. Just think this: we have a hard time getting folks out today to vote. Way too hard. What kind of get out the vote message is this? If you vote today, I swear you'll never have to vote again. You would have to believe that people fail for that argument to believe that vote count. And what they said, we want a high vote and a low count. And that's what we still live under today. Sure, it's been amended and it's been patched, by the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, but the document is infected. It's infected through and through. So even traffic laws are infected by white supremacy. Everything in it, if the goal of the document is to institute white supremacy by law, that's the goal of the document, even when it doesn't mention race. The poll tax never mentioned race. The grandfather clause never mentioned race. But it was a facile way to get at race through other means. So thank you for coming here, and thank you, Robert, for uncovering things I never thought about yet, and should. And thank you all for being here. I think this is the beginning. This is a late start to the 21st century. Thank you very much.
We were supposed to have a little bit of a break. It's going to be 30 seconds. Stand up and stretch, everybody. And then we're going to have Professor Nobles, Professor Woodruff, and Professor Ashmore.